It was nearly 10 p.m. when the rain started falling harder. Cold wind moved through the city streets, cutting through coats and jackets like invisible knives. Neon lights reflected off the wet pavement, cars rushed by, and people hurried home, each lost in their own world. On a quiet bus stop bench, just outside the glow of a streetlight, a man sat completely still. His name was David. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another tired man waiting for a bus. But inside, David felt like he was standing at the edge of something much darker. Only a few months earlier, his life had looked normal. Predictable. Safe. He had a job at a mid-sized company. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. He had a small apartment, a routine, and quiet dreams about the future. He wasn't rich, but he was proud. Independent. Then everything collapsed. The company announced sudden layoffs. David's name was on the list. No warning. No second chances. Just a polite email and a final paycheck. At first, he stayed optimistic. He updated his resume, sent applications, practiced interview answers in the mirror. He told himself this was temporary. But days turned into weeks. Interviews came and went. Every conversation ended the same way. "We'll get back to you." They never did. His savings disappeared faster than he expected. Rent became impossible. The landlord was patient at first, then firm. Eventually, David packed his things into one worn-out backpack and walked out of the apartment he once called home. Asking friends for help felt worse than sleeping outside. He didn't want pity. He didn't want to be a burden. Slowly, messages stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. And just like that, David was alone. Tonight, he sat at the bus stop because it was dry, barely warm, and out of the way. He hugged his jacket tighter around himself and stared at his hands. These hands used to type reports, shake hands, sign documents. Now they trembled from the cold. David looked up at the dark sky and whispered, "Is this really it?" A dangerous thought crept into his mind. One that had been growing louder every night. If I disappear, no one would notice. His chest tightened. His breathing slowed. He closed his eyes. Then he heard footsteps stop in front of him. David opened his eyes to see a woman standing there. She looked to be in her late 40s, maybe early 50s. She wore a simple coat and held a small paper bag. Her voice was gentle. "Are you okay?" David didn't answer. He lowered his gaze, embarrassed, defensive, exhausted. "I see you here sometimes," she continued softly. "I just wanted to check." "I'm fine," David muttered. "Just tired." The woman didn't argue. She smiled. Not the kind of smile people use out of politeness, but one filled with quiet understanding. "I brought you something warm," she said, holding out the bag. David hesitated. Pride fought hunger. Hunger won. He took the bag and looked inside. A container of soup. Bread. Still warm. It wasn't much. But to David, it felt like everything. Before he could speak, the woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded note. "Read this later," she said. Then, without asking his name, without waiting for thanks, she turned and walked away into the rain. David sat there for a long time, holding the bag in his lap. The soup cooled. Cars passed. The city kept moving. Finally, he opened the note. There were only a few words written neatly on the paper. "You matter. Even when you don't believe it." His hands began to shake. Tears filled his eyes, not the quiet, empty tears he'd cried before, but something heavier. Something real. Someone had seen him, not as a problem, not as invisible, as a human being. David whispered to himself, "If a stranger believes I matter, maybe I really do." That night, for the first time in weeks, he slept. The next morning, the city looked different. Not brighter, but possible. As David walked down the street, he noticed a small sign in a store window. Temporary help needed, apply inside. It wasn't a dream job. The pay was low. The hours were uncertain, but it was a start. David walked in. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. He worked hard, showed up early, stayed late. Slowly, trust was built. Responsibilities increased. Life didn't magically fix itself, but it moved forward. Eventually, David found a small room to rent. Then a better job. Then stability. But he never forgot that night. Months later, on a cold, rainy evening, David stood at the same bus stop. In his hands was a paper bag. And on the bench sat a young man, hunched over, staring at the ground. Silent. Broken. David recognized the look instantly. He stepped forward and asked softly, "Are you okay?" The young man didn't answer. David smiled gently and held out the bag. "I brought you something warm." Then he handed him a small folded note. The same words, "You matter, even when you don't believe it." David walked away, knowing one simple truth. Sometimes, one small act of kindness can save a life. Because once, it saved his.